In 2003, a surfer off the coast of California felt something hit his board from below. He looked down and saw a great white shark holding the edge of his board in its mouth. The shark held the edge of the board in its mouth for about 3 seconds. Then it released the board completely and backed away from the surface, and swam away without returning or making any further contact. The surfer was completely uninjured with no bite wounds of any kind. The shark had bitten a fiberglass surfboard and decided it was not what it was looking for. This kind of encounter happens more often than most people are aware of. And it tells you almost everything important about the relationship between great white sharks and human beings. Today we are talking about Carcharias, the great white shark, the animal that has occupied more space in human fear than almost any other creature on Earth, and the animal that is almost certainly not thinking about you at all. Let's start with the number that frames everything else in this conversation. The global average of unprovoked shark attacks on humans across all species is approximately 70 to 80 per year, across the entire planet, including every ocean and every coastline. Across all species of shark in all oceans and all beach environments worldwide. 70 to 80 attacks per year from an animal that exists in every ocean on Earth. For comparison, approximately 20 people per year are killed by cows in the United States alone. That figure is not a global number. It is the United States alone. Mosquitoes kill over 700,000 people every year globally through disease transmission. Falling out of bed kills approximately 450 people per year in the United States. Sharks kill between 5 and 10 people globally per year on average. The gap between public perception of shark danger and the actual statistical record is one of the largest mismatches between fear and reality documented anywhere in risk research. Now let's talk about why those numbers are so extraordinarily low, because this is the genuinely interesting question about great white sharks and humans. Not why great whites attack at all, but why they attack so rarely given their capabilities, given how many millions of people enter the ocean globally every single day, given how routinely great whites swim in waters immediately adjacent to popular beaches, given how capable this animal is of killing a human if it chose to do so. The answer to why attacks are rare is the same answer that explains why most victims survive. The great white shark is not a generalist predator that eats anything it can catch. It is a highly specialized predator with very specific prey preferences, and human beings do not match those prey preferences in any meaningful way. A large adult great white shark in the wild feeds primarily on marine mammals, specifically seals, sea lions, porpoises, and in some regions, smaller whale species. All of these animals share one crucial nutritional characteristic: extremely high body fat content. Fat provides far more caloric return per kilogram than lean muscle tissue does. A single large elephant seal can provide enormous caloric return for minimal hunting energy expenditure. A human being, by comparison, carries very little body fat relative to total body mass. Extremely low in fat by the standards of what a great white considers worthwhile prey. Researchers studying great white feeding behavior have found that these sharks perform what is now described as sample biting or investigative biting on unfamiliar objects. When a great white encounters something at the surface it does not recognize, it will frequently approach the unknown object and deliver a single investigative bite, not to kill and consume, to gather sensory information about what it is dealing with. A shark's mouth contains an extraordinarily dense concentration of sensory nerve endings, far more than most people realize when they think about a shark's mouth as simply a weapon. The bite delivers detailed chemical pressure, texture, and density information that allows the shark to assess whether what it just bit is worth pursuing further. When a great white bites a human surfboard or a wetsuit-clad person near the surface, the sensory return does not match the expected profile of a marine mammal. Wrong density, wrong fat content, wrong chemical profile, not what it was looking for. The shark releases whatever it bit and moves away without pursuing further. This is the primary reason why most people who are bitten by great whites survive the encounter. Not because the shark lacked the physical capability to kill them, it had that capability, but because the shark bit once got information it was not looking for and left. A great white that commits fully to consuming a seal does not leave survivors. The difference in outcomes between a seal attack and a human attack reflects a real difference in what the shark was doing in each case, not a meaningful difference in how physically dangerous the animal itself is in both situations. Now let's talk about what a great white actually is as an animal, because the biology is as remarkable as the reputation and far less covered. Great whites are warm-blooded, technically endothermic, in a way that most sharks and fish are not. Most fish are ectothermic, meaning their body temperature matches the surrounding water. Great whites maintain a body temperature significantly warmer than the surrounding ocean water. This is achieved through a heat exchange system called the rete mirabile, a network of blood vessels, where warm blood leaving the body's core transfers heat to cold blood returning from the gills and muscles. The result is that the shark's core muscles, brain, and eyes operate at a significantly elevated temperature. This gives great whites a significant performance advantage in cold water. Faster muscle contraction speed, quicker neural processing, and better visual acuity than a cold water fish would have. It also means great whites can range into significantly colder waters than their ectothermic relatives and maintain full hunting performance in conditions that would slow a cold-blooded predator considerably. The eyes of a great white are also far more sophisticated than the popular image of a blank black eye suggests. Great whites have color vision, something that was debated for many years but is now established. They have a tapetum lucidum behind the retina, the same reflective layer that gives cats their eye shine in darkness. This amplifies available light in low-light conditions and improves visual sensitivity significantly. Great whites also have the ability to roll their eyes backward into the socket during a bite. This protects the eyeball from damage during the strike. Prey animals fight back, and sharp objects can injure eyes. The rolling reflex happens automatically at the moment of contact. It is why attacking great whites sometimes appear to have white eyes in close-up footage. They are not blind. They have deliberately protected their eyes during the most physically violent part of the hunting sequence. Now let's talk about size, because the numbers people cite for great white sharks are frequently exaggerated. The largest reliably measured great white sharks are in the range of 6 to 6.4 meters in length. This is an enormous animal, the length of a large SUV placed end to end. But the commonly repeated figures of 7 or 8 meter great whites that appear in popular media. These larger figures appear in popular accounts, but are not supported by verified measurements. A great white named Deep Blue, who has been documented and photographed extensively off Hawaii and Mexico, is estimated at approximately 6.1 meters and is considered one of the largest living individuals currently known. She is a female, and the sex of the animal matters significantly for understanding the size record. Female great whites are significantly larger than males across the species. Females reach sexual maturity later and continue growing throughout their adult lives at a slower rate. The largest individuals in any great white population are almost always older females. Deep Blue is estimated to be over 50 years old based on vertebral growth ring analysis, which means she was born in roughly the early 1970s and has been in the Pacific Ocean for over 5 decades. This longevity surprises most people who encounter it for the first time. Great whites can live for 70 years or more based on current research, making them one of the longer-lived cartilaginous fish known, and their growth rate is extremely slow. A great white grows approximately 25 to 30 centimeters per year. A 5-meter great white shark may be approximately 30 years old when measured. This slow growth rate, combined with late sexual maturity, creates serious conservation implications. A great white that is killed before reaching reproductive age at around 15 years for males and 33 years for females represents not just one individual removed from the population, but decades of potential reproductive contribution that will never happen. Great white populations globally are classified as vulnerable and declining. The slow reproduction rate means populations cannot recover quickly from any significant loss of individuals. Now, let's talk about great white behavior in the wild, away from human contact, because this is where research has changed the picture most dramatically in recent decades. For most of the 20th century, great whites were studied almost exclusively through encounters with fishermen and attack victims. The picture that emerged was of an unpredictable, solitary, aggressive animal. With no social structure and no consistent behavior patterns that researchers could identify, then researchers began tagging individual sharks and following them over years and decades. And the picture that emerged from tracking data changed almost every previous assumption completely. Great whites travel enormous distances across ocean basins consistently and repeatedly. An individual tagged off the coast of South Africa was tracked to the waters off Western Australia, approximately 11,000 kilometers away from the original tagging location across open ocean, and then tracked all the way back to South Africa again the following year. Great whites appear to follow specific migration routes between feeding grounds and warmer water areas, used for mating and possibly for gestation of developing pups. Researchers studying aggregations of great whites off Guadalupe Island in Mexico found that the same individual sharks returned to the same location year after year, recognizing specific landmarks and returning to specific feeding grounds with high consistency. This level of site fidelity was not expected from an animal that was assumed to be purely nomadic. Researchers also found that great whites at aggregation sites demonstrate what appears to be a dominance hierarchy. Larger, older individuals occupy preferred positions relative to known prey areas. Smaller or younger individuals defer to larger ones in ways that reduce direct confrontation. This is a social structure, not as complex as a wolf pack or a primate group, but a consistent set of behavioral relationships between individuals that persists across multiple years. Individual great whites at these sites have been found to recognize each other specifically, but respond specifically to known individuals rather than just size or general presence, but respond differently to specific known individuals versus unknown individuals approaching the same location. This kind of individual recognition implies a level of social memory that was simply not attributed to sharks 20 years ago. Now, let's address the specific context in which attacks actually happen. Because the geography and circumstances of the attacks that do happen reveal patterns that media coverage generally ignores. Approximately 50% of all unprovoked shark attacks on humans worldwide happen in North America, specifically in the United States and specifically in Florida. Florida consistently records more shark attacks than any other location on Earth. The reason is not that Florida has particularly aggressive sharks. It is that Florida has an extraordinarily high density of people in the water year-round. Combined with specific water conditions, murky, warm, shallow water that makes visibility poor for both humans and sharks, and significant baitfish populations in nearshore waters that bring sharks close to beaches routinely. The sharks are not targeting beachgoers. The beachgoers are wading into water where sharks are actively feeding on fish. And the sharks occasionally make contact with a human leg that they misidentify briefly as part of the baitfish activity. Most Florida shark bites are classified by researchers as hit-and-run incidents. A single quick bite that does not result in a second attack or any sustained interest from the shark. The injury pattern, typically a bite to the lower leg or foot, reflects an investigative or reflexive bite, not a predatory hunting sequence in which the human was identified as a food target. This pattern is completely different from the rare fatal attacks which show a different behavioral signature entirely. In fatal attacks, the shark makes multiple bites and returns after initial contact. This behavior is associated with a genuine prey pursuit sequence, and it occurs almost exclusively in specific and identifiable circumstances and conditions. Deep water, poor visibility, and the victim behaving in a way that resembles a struggling marine mammal. Spearfishers with bleeding fish attached to their bodies near the water surface. Swimmers in deep water at dawn or dusk when great whites hunt most actively. people in the water during or immediately after seal presence in the same area. The circumstances of fatal attacks cluster in ways that reveal the shark is not randomly targeting humans. It is following a prey pursuit pattern that a human in a specific context happens to fit closely enough to trigger. This is a meaningful distinction because it means the risk from great white sharks is not evenly distributed across all swimming contexts and all ocean environments. It is concentrated in specific conditions and contexts that can be meaningfully assessed and avoided. Now, let's talk about the role great whites actually play in ocean ecosystems, because this context is almost entirely absent from popular coverage of the species. Great whites are apex predators in every ecosystem they inhabit. This means no other animal regularly preys on healthy adult great whites in those systems. Apex predators across ecosystems serve a regulatory function. They control population size and behavior of prey species in ways that cascade through the entire food web. Great whites feeding on seal and sea lion populations prevent those populations from overgrazing nearshore fish stocks. They also selectively remove sick, weakened, and older individuals from seal populations, keeping those populations healthier on average than they would be without predation pressure. Research on marine ecosystems where shark populations have been significantly reduced has documented measurable changes in prey species populations and behavior, and corresponding changes in the species those prey animals feed on. The removal of apex predators from marine ecosystems is not ecologically neutral. The effects ripple through multiple layers of the food web in ways that are difficult to reverse once established. Great whites themselves are currently threatened by a combination of factors: direct killing through targeted shark fishing and bycatch in non-shark fisheries, slow reproductive rates that prevent population recovery from significant harvesting, degradation of habitat for prey species that support great white populations, and the specific vulnerability of juvenile sharks, which are difficult to study and monitor. Juvenile great whites occupy different habitat and eat different prey than adults. They feed on fish rather than marine mammals during their early years, and they inhabit nearshore coastal waters before moving offshore as they grow larger. These juveniles are particularly vulnerable to nearshore fishing activity and habitat degradation, and losses among juvenile cohorts translate directly into adult population decline on a decade-long delay. A reduction in juvenile survival today will not show up as reduced adult abundance for 15 to 20 years. This lag means the consequences of current human impact on juvenile great whites will not be fully visible until well into the future, when reversing any decline becomes significantly more difficult. I want to return to that surfer off the California coast for a moment, to the 3 seconds that a great white held a surfboard in its mouth, and then released it and backed away without returning. In those 3 seconds, the shark gathered sensory information, assessed it against what it was looking for, and made a decision. The decision the shark made in those seconds was not fundamentally about the surfer at all. It was about whether this particular object was worth pursuing. The surfer happened to be attached to the object being assessed. The sensory assessment came back negative, and the shark acted on that information immediately. This is the relationship between great white sharks and human beings in most encounters. A large and capable predator making a rational assessment of whether a particular thing is worth its energy, and almost always arriving at the conclusion that the human being is not what it is looking for. The fear is understandable. A 3-second interaction with a great white is objectively terrifying. But the fear tells us more about how our threat assessment system works under uncertainty than it tells us about the actual intentions or behavior of the animal involved. Write in the comments, have you ever been in the ocean at the same time as a shark without knowing it? Because based on the numbers and the known range of great whites in coastal waters globally, the answer for a significant number of people reading this is almost certainly yes. You simply did not know the shark was present in that same body of water. And the shark assessed the situation and chose not to make any contact at all. There is a specific event in American history that shaped public fear of sharks more than any biological fact, And that event is worth understanding in detail because its influence on perception persists to this day. In July 1916, a series of shark attacks occurred along the New Jersey coastline over 12 days. 5 people were attacked across multiple locations over those 12 days, and 4 of them died. The attacks occurred in multiple locations, including a tidal creek, several kilometers from open ocean, a location that no expert or fisherman of that era believed a shark could reach. The New Jersey attacks of 1916 were the first major shark attack event in American history to receive wide newspaper coverage. They occurred during a summer heat wave when an unusually large number of people were using the ocean for cooling, and they produced a level of public panic and media coverage that was entirely without precedent. President Woodrow Wilson convened a cabinet meeting to discuss the shark problem. The United States government considered deploying the Navy to address the threat. Fishermen and hunters organized killing parties along the New Jersey coast, and the cultural association between sharks and existential danger to human beings was firmly established in the American public imagination in a way that had not existed before those 12 days in 1916. Almost 60 years later, in 1974, Peter Benchley published the novel Jaws. The 1975 film adaptation, directed by Steven Spielberg, turned the great white shark into the dominant symbol of ocean danger in modern popular culture worldwide. Benchley himself spent significant time in the years following the book's publication, expressing regret about the impact the story had on public perception of great whites, and describing the animal in interviews in ways that contradicted the predatory monster he had written. He became an advocate for shark conservation in the later decades of his life, citing specifically his awareness that the fear generated by the book and film had contributed to a significant increase in targeted killing of great white sharks in the decades after 1975. The impact of a single work of popular fiction on the conservation status of a real species is one of the more unusual stories in the history of wildlife biology, and it operates in exactly the opposite direction from the actual risk profile of the animal. Now let's talk about what we have learned about great white shark senses specifically, because the sensory system of this animal is more layered and unusual than most people understand. The lateral line is a pressure sensing system that runs along the length of the shark's body. It detects disturbances in water pressure, the kind created by a struggling or injured animal nearby. It operates at very low frequencies and over significant distances. A great white can detect the irregular movement pattern of an injured fish or seal from considerable distance, before the shark has visual or chemical information about the source of that disturbance. The ampullae of Lorenzini are small pores concentrated around the snout of the shark. Each pore connects to a gel-filled canal that terminates in electroreceptor cells. These receptors detect extremely small electrical fields, down to a fraction of a millionth of a volt per centimeter. Every living organism generates a weak bioelectrical field through normal metabolic activity, muscles contracting, hearts beating. All of this produces electrical signal that the ampullae of Lorenzini can detect at close range with extraordinary sensitivity. This gives great whites the ability to locate prey buried in sand or hiding behind rocks, as long as it is still metabolically active and generating an electrical field. No other sensory system can do this. It is unique to cartilaginous fish among vertebrates. The olfactory system, the sense of smell, is what most people think of first in relation to sharks. And while the famous claim that sharks can smell 1 drop of blood in 1,000,000 gallons of water is an exaggeration, the actual chemosensory sensitivity of a great white is still genuinely remarkable regardless. Great whites can detect certain compounds at concentrations of 1 part per 10 billion in some studies, and they respond directionally to odor plumes following the gradient of increasing concentration toward the source. This directional tracking using concentration gradients, rather than simple presence or absence of a smell, allows a great white to home in on a source of blood or body fluids from very long distances downwind in current terms. The combination of lateral line pressure detection, electrical field detection, olfactory tracking, and visual information gives a great white approaching prey more sensory data about its target than most predators possess before making contact. And it uses that information to make the kind of assessment decision we discussed earlier, whether this specific target is worth the energy and risk of a full committed attack. Now let's talk about great white reproduction, because almost nothing about it works the way most people assume. Great whites are viviparous. They give birth to live young, rather than laying eggs. But unlike mammals, there is no placental connection between mother and developing young. The developing embryos in the uterus receive nutrition in an unusual way. The first embryos to develop begin consuming unfertilized eggs that the mother continues to produce during gestation. This is called oophagy, egg eating, and it means the largest and most developed embryos are consuming the resources that would otherwise support additional embryo development. A great white litter at birth typically contains between 2 and 10 pups. The pups that survive to birth are approximately 1.2 to 1.5 meters long, already significantly sized animals at birth. Gestation in great whites is estimated at approximately 12 to 18 months depending on conditions. This is one of the longest gestation periods documented in any shark species worldwide, and females reproduce only once every 2 to 3 years at most. The combination of small litter size, long gestation, and extended recovery period between pregnancies produces one of the lowest reproductive rates of any large marine predator. A single female great white might produce a maximum of around 10 to 15 surviving offspring across her entire lifespan. This number is orders of magnitude lower than most fish species of comparable size and ecological importance. A cod or large tuna produces millions of eggs in a single spawning event. For comparison, a great white produces single digits to low double digits of live young per decade. This is why great white populations are so vulnerable to human pressure, and why population recovery from any significant decline takes not years, but decades. Now let's talk about one of the more unusual documented behaviors associated with great whites: spy hopping. The behavior in which a great white lifts its head vertically out of the water, exposing the eyes and sometimes part of the body above the surface. This behavior has been documented at multiple great white aggregation sites, and its purpose is not fully established. One hypothesis is that spy hopping allows the shark to use visual information above the water surface to locate prey, specifically seals, hauled out on rocks or ice that would not be visible from underwater. The eye of a great white is capable of functioning in air as well as water, and some researchers believe spy hopping specifically gathers visual information about targets on the water surface and above it that are not visible from underwater. Another hypothesis connects spy hopping to curiosity or environmental assessment more generally. Researchers who have observed spy hopping up close describe individual sharks returning to the same position repeatedly, as if gathering sustained visual information about something specific above the waterline. The full interpretation of this behavior remains an open research question. Now, there is something specific about the relationship between orcas and great whites. That deserves attention because it upends the popular image of the great white as apex predator in all contexts. Orcas, killer whales, prey on great white sharks in specific ocean regions. Documented cases exist off the coast of South Africa and in Californian waters of orca groups systematically killing and partially consuming great white sharks in those waters. The technique orcas use involves flipping the shark upside down, which induces a state called tonic immobility, a paralytic reflex in sharks that is triggered by inversion. A great white held upside down in the water by an orca enters tonic immobility and becomes essentially unresponsive. The orca then consumes specific organs, primarily the liver, which is extremely energy-dense in great whites, and leaves the remainder of the carcass behind without further consumption. Researchers studying great white aggregation sites in South Africa found something remarkable following documented orca predation events at those sites. Great white sharks completely abandoned the aggregation site for the season following a predation event. and in some cases did not return to that specific location for years afterward. Great whites can detect the presence of orca through chemical cues in the water. The scent signature of an orca is sufficient to trigger immediate avoidance behavior. And researchers found that even playing recordings of orca echolocation sounds underwater near great white sharks caused the great white sharks in the area to leave rapidly and not return immediately. The animal at the top of the marine food web in its normal range flees from a different apex predator entirely without attempting any defensive engagement. This interaction adds a layer of complexity to any simple description of great whites as unconditional rulers of the ocean. They are dominant in most contexts and against most species they encounter, but they exist within a more complex predator relationship than the apex label alone suggests. Write in the comments whether you think about sharks when you swim in the ocean, because I think the gap between how much people fear great whites and how the actual relationship between this animal and human beings operates in the real data is one of the clearest examples of how poorly human fear and actual risk tend to align. Back to those 3 seconds on a surfboard off the California coast, the shark completing its assessment, releasing the board and backing away, and the surfer paddling back in and going home completely physically unchanged. That is the statistically normal outcome for any great white encounter with a human being. Not because the ocean carries no risks or dangers of any kind at all, but because the animal in it made an assessment and you were not what it was looking for. There is one more thing about great whites that almost never gets discussed in popular coverage, and it connects to a question that several research groups have been actively investigating recently. Do great white sharks sleep? And if they do, what exactly does that look like? And if they do, what does that look like in an animal that must keep swimming to breathe? Fish that use a swim bladder can stop swimming and rest in place. Sharks lack a swim bladder, and many species, including great whites, are obligate ram ventilators, meaning they must swim continuously to force water across their gills to extract oxygen. A great white that stops swimming entirely stops receiving oxygen and will die. For years, this was interpreted to mean sharks cannot sleep in any meaningful sense. They simply continue swimming forward indefinitely without any rest period at all. Then researchers observing a population of great whites off the coast of Mexico documented something unexpected. Individual sharks occasionally oriented themselves into the prevailing current and appeared to enter a state of reduced activity, moving slowly with the current with minimal muscular effort and reduced responsiveness to stimuli. They would maintain this posture for extended periods before resuming normal active behavior. Researchers have interpreted this as a possible sleep-like state in which the current provides ventilation. While the animal is in a reduced consciousness or reduced activity period, this is still an active area of investigation, and the neurological nature of shark rest states remains far from fully understood at the neurological and cellular level currently. But the simple answer of sharks never sleep appears to be incorrect, or at least significantly incomplete. Based on behavioral observation, even if the mechanism differs substantially from sleep in air-breathing animals, there is also the question of whether great whites engage in anything resembling play behavior, which sounds like an unlikely topic but has genuine observational support in the research literature. Researchers and experienced divers working with known individual great whites have documented behaviors that do not fit any obvious hunting or survival purpose, pushing debris around with their snouts returning to the same object multiple times, showing sustained interest in something that provides no nutritional value and poses no threat. A great white near Guadalupe Island was documented interacting with a floating kelp mass for an extended period, pushing it, investigating it, circling it, and returning to it over and over. Researchers observing this described the behavior as resembling what they would call play in any other large predator they studied. This does not mean great whites play in the same way dogs or otters play, but it suggests the behavioral repertoire of this animal extends beyond pure survival activity in ways that align with patterns researchers associate with higher cognitive engagement in other species. There is one final number I want to leave you with before closing. Approximately 100 million sharks of all species are killed by humans every year. The majority of this killing happens through the shark fin trade specifically, where sharks are caught alive, their fins are removed, and the living but now immobile body is returned to the ocean, where it sinks to the seafloor and dies slowly from the inability to ventilate its gills. The animal is still alive when it hits the water after finning. It can no longer move forward, and it can no longer force water across its gills. And there is absolutely nothing it can do about either of those two facts simultaneously. This is the actual relationship between human beings and great white sharks in 2024. Not the surfer on the board and the shark checking whether the board is a seal, but 100 million to 5, and the 100 million is on our side of the ledger. 100 million sharks per year killed by humans across all species and all ocean regions, and between 5 and 10 humans killed by sharks per year in the entire world. The relationship between human beings and sharks is not a balanced conflict between two dangerous parties. It is a one-sided extraction that the ocean is paying for and will continue paying for. As shark populations decline and the ecosystems that depend on them reorganize around their absence. Write in the comments whether any of this changed how you think about being in the ocean near sharks. Because the fear is real and it is understandable, and it has specific historical reasons for being as strong as it is. But the animal that originally generated that fear in human culture is currently losing the actual conflict between our species and theirs, at a rate that should concern us far more than the attack statistics do.